Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story. And tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
Autumn in London that year had been singularly melancholic. The sky seemed permanently swathed in a thick blanket of grey clouds, through which, even at high noon, the sun struggled to penetrate, offering only a dim, diffused hint of light. Rain, fine and persistent, had not ceased for a week, transforming the cobblestones of magical London into a mirror, wherein the reflections of Diagon Alley's shopfronts shivered. Harry Potter stood by the window in the drawing-room of number 12, Grimmauld Place, watching raindrops race one another down the glass. The house was quiet, save for the crackling of logs in the fireplace, and the rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock disturbing the silence. It was that rare breed of peace Harry had only learned to appreciate with age. A peace devoid of anxiety, the peace of an adult who knows that all wars are in the past, and ahead lies only evening tea, and perhaps an interesting book. However, as was often the case in Harry's life, peace was merely a prelude to something new. The green flames in the fireplace suddenly flared brighter, shifting from warm orange to emerald, and a moment later the drawing-room was filled with the voice of Ron Weasley. Ron's head, floating amidst the coals, looked somewhat dishevelled and agitated. "Harry, you home?" Ron asked, as if the answer weren't obvious. "Hermione said to tell you to get over to her place immediately. She says it's arch-important. And knowing her, if she's using the prefix arch, she's probably found something that'll make us forget about the weekend." Harry smiled, feeling a familiar sense of excitement waking in his chest. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he replied, stepping away from the window. The rain beyond the glass no longer seemed quite so dreary. Now it was merely scenery for the start of a new chapter. When Harry apparated onto the porch of the Granger Weasley house, evening had completely enveloped the suburbs. The windows of Hermione's study on the second floor glowed with a warm, golden light that promised comfort and secrets. Inside, it smelled as it always did where Hermione was working, of old parchment, ink, a touch of vanilla, and strong, freshly brewed coffee. Hermione sat behind her massive oak desk, which was piled high with so many books, scrolls, and maps that the mistress of the house herself was barely visible. She looked tired, but in her eyes burned that same fire Harry remembered from their days huddled in the Hogwarts library before OWLs. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, from which a few rebellious strands had escaped, and there was a small smudge of ink on her cheek. "Harry!" she exclaimed, not even lifting her head from the enormous, age-yellowed scroll that occupied the center of the desk. "Thank Merlin you're here. Sit down. You need to see this. Just be careful, don't knock over the 12th century star chart, it's exceedingly fragile." Harry carefully navigated past a stack of encyclopedias and sat in the armchair opposite. Ron was already there. He sat on the sofa in the corner, clutching a cup of tea, and watching his wife with a mixture of admiration and mild, habitual resignation. "What's happened, Hermione?" Harry asked, leaning forward. Ron said it was something urgent. Hermione finally looked up. Her eyes were shining. "Not just urgent, Harry. It's incredible. Do you remember the legend of the great Library of Alexandria?" "Well, of course," Harry nodded. "The greatest library of antiquity, burned down in a fire when Julius Caesar—" "No," Hermione interrupted with a fervor unique to her moments of academic discovery. "That's what Muggles know. That's what's written in history textbooks. But in the wizarding world, There have always been rumors that the true, magical section of the library didn't burn. That it was hidden. She ran a finger along the ancient scroll. The parchment was so old it appeared translucent, like dried snakeskin. Inscribed upon it were complex geometric shapes, astronomical diagrams, and rows of hieroglyphs that pulsed softly with a faint blue light every now and then, as if breathing. I found this scroll in the Department of Mysteries archives, in the Forgotten Civilizations section, she continued, speaking fast, as if afraid the thought might escape. It was considered just a copy of some poem, but it's a cipher, magical steganography. I spent 3 months finding the key, and here. She paused dramatically, and the only sound in the room became the rustle of rain against the window. These are coordinates, Harry, and instructions. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed. It was moved. The ancient mage keepers understood the world was becoming too dangerous for such knowledge. They didn't just hide it in a dungeon or cast invisibility charms. They placed it in a pocket of reality, outside space and time. Ron took a loud sip of tea, the sound slightly diffusing the thick atmosphere of solemnity. And, naturally, he said, one can't just knock and enter, right? Precisely, nodded Hermione, ignoring the irony. The entrance opens only under specific astronomical conditions. When the planets align in a particular configuration, the Egyptian priests called the Eye of Horus. It happens extremely rarely. How rarely? Harry asked, already sensing where this was going. Once every 347 years, whispered Hermione. And the next such alignment occurs. She looked at the wall calendar, where a date was circled in red ink. The day after tomorrow. At midnight. In Egypt. Harry leaned back in his chair. He looked at his friends, at Ron, pretending to be more interested in a biscuit but actually listening to every word, and at Hermione, looking as though she'd just found proof of Merlin's existence. He recalled his thoughts of peace and evening tea, and he realized that in truth, it wasn't peace he lacked. He lacked precisely this, the sense of a mystery calling him onto the road. Egypt, he said slowly. We haven't been there since Bill and Fleur took us on a tour of the pyramids. This isn't a holiday trip, Harry, Hermione said seriously, though the corners of her lips twitched upwards slightly. If my calculations are correct, the entrance lies deep in the Libyan Desert, in a place Muggles call the Great Sand Sea. There are no roads, no settlements, only dunes and wind, and we must be there exactly at the time of the planetary alignment. If we are late by even a minute, the doors will shut for another 3 centuries. And what are we looking for there? Asked Ron. I mean, besides the glory of discovery and the probable curse of mummies. Hermione's face grew grave. Knowledge, Ron. There could be scrolls considered lost forever, magic that existed before the founding of Hogwarts, medicinal recipes, forgotten spells, the truth about the history of magic. We cannot allow this to remain in the dark. Harry stood and walked to the window. The rain in London was still falling, cold and grey. But in his mind's eye, he already saw another sky, bottomless, black, strewn with myriads of stars hanging over a boundless ocean of sand. When do we leave? He asked, turning to his friends. Hermione beamed. Ron sighed, setting down his cup, but a glint of adventure appeared in his eyes too. The portkey is ready for tomorrow morning, she replied. Pack your bags. Take light clothes for the day, and very warm ones for the night. The desert does not forgive frivolity. The next morning, London saw them off with a thick fog that clung to their faces like wet cobwebs. They gathered on a small, nondescript wasteland outside the city, where, according to Hermione, the Ministry had registered an international portkey departure point. This portkey turned out to be an old, battered copper oil lamp that looked as though it had been thrown onto a rubbish heap back in Queen Victoria's time. "Everyone ready?" asked Harry, adjusting the strap of his rucksack. He felt a familiar tension in his stomach, that same sensation before a leap into the unknown. Ron checked his robe pockets, ensuring his wand was in place, and nodded. Hermione, clutching the precious tube containing the scroll, inhaled the damp air deeply. "On the count of 3, she commanded. 1, 2, 3. Their fingers touched the cold metal of the lamp. The world around them vanished instantly. The familiar, unpleasant sensation of a jerk somewhere behind the navel seized them, spinning them in a whirlwind of color and sound. Wind whistled in their ears, space compressed and stretched, time lost its meaning. It seemed as though they were flying through a tunnel woven of rubber and light. And then it all ceased abruptly. Their feet hit hard ground. Harry staggered slightly, trying to regain his balance. Ron fell to his knees in traditional fashion, muttering curses at the inventor of portkeys, and Hermione landed gracefully, immediately looking around. The contrast was staggering. Just a minute ago, they had stood in a grey, damp London morning. Now they were surrounded by a blinding, vibrant world. They had arrived on the outskirts of Cairo, not in the noisy center, but in a quiet, magical quarter, hidden from Muggle eyes by ancient charms. The air here was entirely different. It was hot, dry, and smelled of sun-baked stone, exotic spices, cardamom, cumin, saffron, and dust that seemed to have lain here for millennia. The sun stood high in the zenith, mercilessly bleaching the color from everything it touched. The sky was not merely blue, it was a piercing turquoise, without a single cloud, so deep that looking at it made one dizzy. "Welcome to Egypt," said Hermione, removing her warm cloak to reveal light linen clothing underneath. She squinted against the sun. "We have little time. We need to get to the Siwa oasis by sunset. Our journey into the desert begins there." They walked quickly through the narrow streets of the magical quarter. The houses here were made of yellow sandstone, with flat roofs and shutters painted with protective runes. Merchants in colorful turbans offered flying carpets, which were far more popular here than broomsticks, scarab amulets, and vials of living water of the Nile. Harry felt the gaze of local wizards upon him. Some recognized him. The scar on his forehead was a universal calling card in any part of the magical world, but here in the East, people were more reserved. They merely nodded respectfully or placed a hand over their heart, not daring to disturb the hero. In the market square, Hermione arranged the rental of 3 sand skimmers, magical boards resembling surfboards but designed for gliding over dunes. "Why not apparate?" asked Ron, eyeing the flimsy construction of the skimmer suspiciously. "The desert we are heading into is saturated with ancient wild magic," Hermione explained, checking the fastenings of her luggage. "Space there is unstable. Apparition could splint you not into body parts, but scatter your essence across different eras. Skimmers are safe and fast." The journey to the oasis was long but thrilling. They raced over the sands, leaving a trail of golden dust behind them. The wind whipped their faces, hot as a dragon's breath. The landscape shifted, from rocky plains to majestic dunes that rose like frozen ocean waves. As the sun began to dip towards the west, painting the sky in incredible shades of violet, orange, and blood red, they reached the edge of civilization. Before them stretched the great sand sea. Here they left the skimmers. Beyond this point, technology, even magical, did not work. They had to walk, relying only on the stars and the scroll. "From here begins the real journey," said Hermione quietly, unfurling the map. The scroll began to glow brighter in the twilight, its blue radiance pointing the way like a compass needle. "We must walk deep into the desert all night. The entrance will open exactly when Sirius, Orion's belt, and Mars align in a single line above the dune of time." Night in the desert did not fall gradually, as it does in England, where twilight can linger for hours. Here, darkness descended suddenly, as if someone invisible had thrown a heavy velvet cover over the world. And with the darkness came the cold. It wasn't the damp, piercing chill of a London November that makes bones ache. It was the clean, dry, crystal cold of space. The sand, which an hour ago had scorched the soles of their boots, was now rapidly losing heat, becoming icy to the touch. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had been walking for several hours. Around them stretched a landscape that might have belonged to another planet. Giant dunes rose up as black silhouettes, their sharp crests outlined against a sky that had become the main character of this night. Harry had never seen such a sky. Here, hundreds of miles from the artificial lights of cities, the stars didn't just twinkle, they blazed. The Milky Way traversed the firmament in a broad, bright band, looking like spilt milk or scattered diamond dust. It seemed one only had to reach out a hand to touch Cassiopeia or stroke the constellation of Leo. The silence was so profound that Harry could hear not only his own breathing, but the whisper of sand grains sliding underfoot, and even the thumping of blood in his ears. "I never thought it could be this cold in Egypt," muttered Ron, wrapping his warm cloak tighter and breathing on his numb fingers. His voice sounded unnaturally loud in this absolute silence, and the desert seemed to swallow the sound instantly, leaving not even an echo. "Why do books always write about the merciless sun, but forget the acre freezing cold at night?" "It's physics, Ron," Hermione responded quietly, not slowing her pace. She walked ahead, holding the unfurled scroll before her, which now glowed much brighter than in the day. Its blue radiance illuminated a strip of sand before her feet. Sand has low heat capacity. It doesn't hold heat. But there is magic here too. We are approaching a place where the boundary between worlds grows thin. The cold is a sign of the presence of the beyond. Or eternity. Harry brought up the rear, occasionally glancing back. But behind them was only darkness. Their footprints, left on the slopes of the dunes, disappeared instantly under the breath of the light night wind, as if the desert jealously guarded its secrets and didn't want anyone finding the way back. It evoked a strange dual feeling. On one hand, anxiety at being cut off from the world, on the other, an amazing freedom. Here there was no ministry of magic with its bureaucracy, no fans, no past. Only the starry sky and the path. He took a sip from his flask. The coffee Hermione had brewed magically back at their rest stop remained hot and strong. The bitterness of the drink was invigorating and helped him focus. "How much longer?" asked Harry as they crested another particularly high dune. His legs were beginning to ache from constantly sinking into the shifting sand. Hermione stopped and held the scroll up, checking the shimmering symbols on the parchment against the position of the stars in the sky. "We are almost there," she said, and a tremor of excitement ran through her voice. "Look." She pointed towards the horizon. There, amidst a sea of identical dunes, towered one that was different. It was perfectly pyramidal in shape, and its peak seemed to touch the brightest star in the sky, Sirius. But the strangest thing wasn't that. The sand on this dune wasn't yellow or black in the darkness. It shimmered. A faint silvery glow emanated from within the mountain, as if a giant lantern were hidden beneath a thin layer of sand. "The Dune of Time," whispered Hermione. "Just as the prophecy said, we made it. 15 minutes until the planetary alignment." They quickened their pace, almost running, sliding down the slope of the previous dune and scrambling up the side of the Dune of Time. The sand here felt strange to the touch, fine as flour, and somehow slippery, as if every grain had been polished to perfect smoothness. When they stepped on it, a strange sound rang out, not a crunch, but something like a quiet, melodious chime or a whisper, the whisper of sands. Harry recalled the title of a chapter in Hermione's book. Now he understood it wasn't a metaphor. When they reached the top, all three gasped. From the height of the dune, a view opened up of a gigantic depression, perfectly circular, like a meteorite crater. But the bottom of this crater was absolutely flat and smooth as a mirror. It was a lake, not of water but of that same silver sand as the dune. Hermione pulled an antique pocket watch from her beaded bag, the same one Harry had given her for her 17th birthday. The hands were approaching 12. "Time," she said. "We need to get down to the center. Quickly." They ran down to the center of the silver lake. Standing here felt strange. The surface was hard as stone, though it looked like shifting sand. Harry looked up. Directly above them, at the zenith, 3 bright points, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, were slowly but inexorably drawing closer, forming a perfect line pointing towards the constellation of Libra. "The Eye of Horus is opening," commented Hermione, not taking her eyes off the scroll. Now she was reading aloud, and the language was unfamiliar, not Latin, nor even ancient Egyptian. It was a language consisting of guttural, vibrating sounds that resonated with the very air. Ashara, ten Briz, Lux Eterna. With every word, the wind strengthened. It began to spiral around them, lifting silver dust into the air. The stars overhead flared so brightly that Harry had to squint. And then it happened. A beam of starlight, so dense it seemed material, struck from the sky directly into the center of the circle where they stood. But it didn't burn them. It passed through them, striking the surface of the sand mirror. The ground beneath their feet trembled. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the vibration of a gigantic, invisible mechanism waking after centuries of sleep. The sand in the center of the crater began to move, but it didn't fall downwards. Instead, it began to flow upwards, defying the laws of gravity. Thin streams of sand rose, intertwined, danced in the beam of starlight, forming outlines. First came columns, then arches, then high gates decorated with moving reliefs. Before them, out of thin air and sand, an entrance grew. It was majestic and at the same time ephemeral, like a mirage that had gained density. The gates were at least 50 feet high, and on their leaves, made of a material resembling obsidian, golden runes shimmered. "Incredible," breathed Ron. His face was pale in the silver light, eyes wide open. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Even better than the Quidditch World Cup final." "The Lost Library," whispered Hermione, rolling up the scroll. Her hands were shaking. "It exists." The gates began to open slowly. No sound of stone grinding on stone. Only that same melodious whisper, like the exhalation of a giant. Air drifted from the opening, smelling not of the desert, but of old paper, wax and something sweet, like incense. "Let's go," said Hermione, taking a step forward. "The entrance will be open for only a few minutes, while the perfect alignment lasts." Harry hesitated for a moment. His aura or intuition, honed by years of danger, quietly warned him. This entrance looked too welcoming, too majestic. But he looked at Hermione, at her determination, at her thirst for knowledge that had driven her all her life. He couldn't stop her, and, truthfully, he didn't want to. He grasped Ron by the shoulder, and the three of them stepped into the band of light, crossing the threshold between the world of the living and the world of forgotten stories. The sensation was strange. It wasn't like walking through a door. It was like passing through a waterfall. Cold seized the body for a moment, then heat, then a feeling of weightlessness. Ears rang, as if thousands of voices were speaking simultaneously in whispers. Harry instinctively closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the desert was gone. They stood in a vast hall, the ceiling of which was lost in darkness, somewhere high above. The floor was tiled in black and white marble like a chessboard. And all around were shelves, endless rows of shelves rising upwards and stretching into the distance as far as the eye could see. They twisted, intersected, formed bridges and balconies. It was a city built of books. The light here was soft, golden. It poured from floating orbs drifting slowly through the air like lazy fireflies. "We are inside," said Hermione quietly. Her voice echoed off the walls with a strange reverberation that repeated the words several times, changing intonation. "Inside. Inside." "Go." Harry turned to look at the entrance. He expected to see the open gates and the starry desert sky. But behind them was only a solid wall of book spines. Hermione." Ron's voice trembled. "Where's the door?" Hermione spun around. "They should be here. The planetary alignment lasts another 5 minutes. They couldn't have closed so quickly." Harry walked to the wall of books and tried to push them apart, but they sat tight, like bricks in a wall. He drew his wand. "Alohomora!" The beam hit the books, but instead of opening a passage, it simply soaked into the bindings like water into a dry sponge. The books rustled quietly, and Harry was ready to swear he heard quiet laughter. "Reducto!" tried Ron. The effect was the same. Magic worked differently here. Or didn't work at all against the library itself. "It's not just a door," said Harry, feeling a chill run down his spine despite the warm air of the hall. "We didn't just pass through space. We passed through time." Hermione paled. She unfurled her scroll again, but now the symbols on it shifted chaotically, not forming coherent text. "The entrance," she whispered. "The entrance doesn't lead down, underground. It leads through." I didn't account for the shift in temporal flows. The doors didn't close because time ran out outside, but because time doesn't exist here. They stood in the middle of the majestic hall, surrounded by millions of volumes of wisdom but cut off from the world they knew. The silence of the library no longer seemed comforting. It seemed expectant. Somewhere in the depths of the labyrinth of shelves, a sound was heard, as if someone ran a finger along the spines of books. And then, the sound of footsteps. "Seems we are not alone here," said Harry, gripping his wand. The adventure they had dreamed of had just turned into a trap, and the library, which held the stories of millennia, was ready to add one more, the story of 3 wizards who entered, never to leave. The sound of footsteps drifting from the darkness froze them where they stood. Harry instantly spun around, putting his back to the solid wall where the entrance had been just a moment before, and raised his wand. Beside him, Ron and Hermione did the same, their shoulders tense, their breathing ragged. "Lumos Maxima," Harry cried. A ball of blinding white light burst from the tip of his wand and soared forward, slicing through the gloom of the colossal hall. It streaked past rows of shelves, snatching from the shadows the outlines of columns, curving staircases and endless book spines. But it illuminated no one. The footsteps ceased as abruptly as they had begun. In their place, the hall was filled with a different sound, a strange dry rustling, like wind sifting through dry leaves in an autumn forest. "There's no one here," Ron whispered, lowering his wand slightly but not stowing it. His eyes darted feverishly around the hall. "Harry, I swear I heard footsteps. Heavy, distinct footsteps. Someone was walking right towards us." "I heard it too," Hermione agreed. She took a step forward, peering into the golden haze that hung between the shelves. "But look at the floor." Harry lowered his gaze. The marble floor, laid in black and white tiles, was coated in a thin layer of age-old dust. Their own footprints were clearly stamped upon it, leading away from the wall. But there were no other tracks. No one had approached them. "It's not a person," Harry realized, feeling a cold shiver race down his spine. The sound didn't come from the floor. It came from everywhere. He approached the nearest shelving unit. It was a massive structure of dark wood that soared upwards, vanishing into the darkness somewhere beneath the ceiling, if indeed there was a ceiling here. The books stood tightly packed, spine to spine. And then Harry saw it. One of the books, a thick tome in cracked red leather, moved. It didn't fall, nor did it tilt. It sighed. Its pages expanded, drawing in air, and then compressed again, producing that very sound they had mistaken for footsteps, the sound of leather binding rubbing against wood. "They're alive," breathed Hermione, stepping up to Harry. Her face expressed a mixture of horror and academic rapture. "It wasn't footsteps, Ron. It's the books. They are turning over, stretching their pages, shifting. It is the sound of millions of books living their own lives." Now that they understood the nature of the sound, the fear receded slightly, giving way to awe at the sheer scale of the place. The Library of Alexandria was not merely a repository. It was a city. The shelves here did not stand in rows as in ordinary libraries. They formed streets, alleyways, cul-de-sacs and plazas. They twisted in spirals, formed arches and bridges that spanned abysses, whose bottoms could not be seen. Some shelves hung in the air, unsupported, connected only by flimsy staircases that shimmered as if woven from moonlight. The air was thick and rich. It smelled of the beeswax used to polish the wood, the dry dust of centuries, the sharp metallic tang of ink, and the sweetish scent of old glue. It was the scent of concentrated history, so dense it felt as though one could slice it with a knife. "We need to move," said Harry, tearing his gaze away from a towering spire of encyclopedias. "The entrance is gone. The wall is solid. The only way is deeper in." They set off down a paved street, between the shelves. Walking felt strange. Space here behaved unpredictably. Sometimes it seemed they were walking in circles, though the path led straight. Sometimes the distance to the nearest column seemed negligible, yet it took them 10 minutes to reach it. Suddenly, a loud flapping of wings erupted above their heads. Ron instinctively ducked, shielding his head with his arms. "What's that? Bats?" But they were not bats. An enormous tome in a heavy metal binding, resembling a medieval codex, was floating slowly through the air, rhythmically flapping its covers like the wings of a giant bird. Swarming around it like angry wasps were small paperback pamphlets, trying to peck at it with their corners. Information warfare in the literal sense, Hermione commented, following this strange flock with her eyes. Looks like a dispute between fundamental science and the yellow press. One of the bookbirds, a small volume of poetry in velvet binding, broke away from the flock, dived, and delicately landed on Ron's shoulder. Ron froze, squinting sideways at it. The book preened its feathers, smoothing its crumpled pages, and began to purr quietly, vibrating. "It's purring." Ron's voice cracked into a falsetto. "Harry, get it off me. I don't want to be a nesting box for poetry." "Don't touch it," Harry smiled, feeling the tension ease slightly. "It seems to like you, Ron. Perhaps it's a collection of love ballads. Or epitaphs," Ron added gloomily, but he refrained from making any sudden movements. They continued walking. The deeper they went into the labyrinth, the louder the background noise became. Now it wasn't just rustling. It was voices. Thousands of voices whispering simultaneously in different languages, interrupting one another. Truth is in wine, but wisdom in water. The third law of soul transmutation states, "The king is dead, long live the usurper. Take 2 drops of phoenix tears and mix with the ash of hope." Hermione stopped and covered her ears with her hands. "Too many words," she whispered. "They all want to be read. They are hungry. Books only live when they are read by a mind. And here, no one has been here for centuries. They are starving for attention." "Hermione, don't listen to them." Harry grabbed her elbow, forcing her to keep moving. "We need to find the center. Or someone in charge." Suddenly, the shelves ahead parted, forming a wide circular plaza. In the center stood neither a statue nor a fountain, but a colossal inkwell hewn from black stone, the size of a swimming pool. It was filled with a thick dark liquid that motionlessly reflected the golden light of the floating orbs. But most alarming was the fact that the shelves surrounding this plaza were empty. Not a single book. Only bare shelves covered in a thick layer of gray dust. The books flying near the ceiling gave this place a wide berth, as if afraid to approach. "I don't like this," said Harry, raising his wand again. His auror instincts were screaming of danger. "Why is it so quiet here? Why do the books avoid this place?" "Maybe it's a quarantine zone," suggested Ron, having finally shaken the poetry collection off his shoulder. "Or a graveyard for failed manuscripts?" Hermione, as if hypnotized, walked closer to the edge of the giant inkwell. "It's not just ink," she said, peering into the black, mirror-like surface. "It is nigredo. Primal matter in alchemy. Chaos from which order is born. The substance from which all the words of the world are born." "Hermione, get back!" Harry shouted sharply. He noticed movement. Not in the air, but on the surface of the ink. The perfectly smooth liquid began to ripple, though there was no wind. Something began to rise from the center of the inkwell. At first, it looked like a shapeless column of black liquid flowing upwards, defying the laws of physics. Then the mass began to thicken and take shape. Broad shoulders appeared, an elongated head, disproportionately long arms ending in fingers from which thick ink dripped. The figure had no distinct facial features, only 2 deep hollows where eyes should be, within which flickered a cold white light, like the light of a distant star. It was enormous, at least 10 feet tall, and seemed composed not of flesh, but of shadows and words that constantly flowed across its surface, forming sentences, and immediately disintegrating. The creature stepped fully out of the inkwell, and placed a soundless foot on the marble floor. Where it stepped, black footprints in the form of complex runic formulas remained on the white stone. "Seekers," a voice resonated. It did not come from where a mouth should be, for it had no mouth. The voice sounded directly inside their heads. It was dry as the rustle of ancient papyrus, and deep as an abyss. Alive amidst dead words, warm amidst cold paper. You have broken the silence. Harry gripped his wand tighter, though reason told him that against this creature, ordinary combat spells would be useless. How can you wound something made of liquid and words? How do you disarm the very concept of knowledge? The shadow figure slowly tilted its head, if the movement of that inky mass could be called that, examining the three travelers. Symbols flashed and faded in the depths of its eyes, as if someone were rapidly flicking through the pages of a book. "We mean no harm," Hermione spoke up. Her voice trembled, but it held the same steely determination that had once helped them stand against Death Eaters. She took a step forward, shielding Harry and Ron, which was absurd in terms of physical protection, but perfectly logical for her. "We have come for knowledge. We seek the chronicle of lost time." The creature made a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. It was laughter. "Knowledge." The voice rustled in their minds. "Everyone comes for knowledge, but no one asks if knowledge wants to be found. You have entered a house you did not build. You breathe air that belongs to stories, not people." The shadow raised a hand, and a drop of ink broke from its fingers. It fell onto the marble floor but did not splatter into a stain. Instead, it instantly transformed into a small black spider that scuttled towards Ron. Ron flinched and stepped back, nearly tripping over his own robes. "I am the keeper," the entity continued. "I am the sum of all unwritten endings and forgotten beginnings. I allow you to remain because the library is curious. It has not tasted fresh thoughts for a long time. Your memories smell vivid, of war, of love, of fear." Harry felt a chill run down his neck. The keeper wasn't looking at them as guests. It was looking at them as new books to be placed on a shelf. "But remember," the keeper's voice grew harder, vibrating in the very stone of the floor, "knowledge has weight. Nothing here is given for free. For every answer you will pay with a part of yourself. If you take a story from here, you must leave something in return." "We agree," Hermione answered quickly, before Harry could object. "We are prepared to pay the price." The keeper slowly nodded. Its form began to lose coherence, dissolving into the air as black mist. "Seek the section of echoes," it whispered, fading away. "But be careful. Not all books want to be read. Some want to read you." And with those words it vanished, drawn back into the giant inkwell, which instantly calmed, becoming a perfectly smooth mirror once more. Only the faint smell of ozone and old ink remained, to remind them that an entity older than most known civilizations had just stood there. The silence returned, but now it was even more fraught with tension. "Some want to read you," repeated Ron, looking nervously around at the shelves, which seemed to have shuffled a little closer. "Brilliant. Just brilliant. I always knew reading would lead to no good. Hermione, are you sure we want to go on?" "We have no choice, Ron," she replied, already unfurling her scroll, which seemed to have calmed down slightly and was showing a map again, albeit dimly. The lines on the parchment now pulsed with golden light, indicating a path deeper into the labyrinth. "The exit is closed. The only way to get out is to find what we came for. The chronicle might contain the key to controlling the temporal flows of the library. Without it, we'll just wander here for eternity, until we turn into joke books or heroic epics ourselves." They moved on, following the directions on Hermione's map. Their path led across a bridge spanning an abyss, the bottom of which was invisible. A cool wind rose from below, smelling of ozone, storm, and damp paper. On either side of the bridge, books hung in the air, chained by thick, rusty chains to invisible supports. They tore at their chains, snapped their spine-covered bindings, and made sounds like the muffled growling of wild beasts. "The restricted section?" asked Harry, trying to keep to the center of the bridge and away from the snapping tomes. "Worse," commented Hermione, casting a quick glance at a black tome, trying to gnaw through its chain. "This is the section of disproven theories and dangerous ideas. Thoughts that proved false or too destructive for the world are kept here, but they refuse to die. They are very angry at reality for rejecting them." Crossing the bridge, they found themselves in a completely different part of the library. Here, the architecture changed radically. Instead of dark wood and warm paper, everything around was made of crystal, light and thin, almost transparent parchment. The shelves were translucent, tall and fragile-looking, and the books upon them did not stand, but floated inside crystal prisms. This was the section of echoes. It was quiet here, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence before dawn, when the world holds its breath. The air was filled with shimmering dust that glowed with different colors, blue, pink, silver, as they walked through it. It felt as though they were walking through a cloud of stardust. "Look!" Harry pointed to a shelf on the right. Inside, one of the prisms floated a book that looked as if it were made of pure water. Its shape was constantly changing, flowing from one state to another. Next to it was a book of fire that burned but did not consume its pages. "These are primal elements," Hermione guessed, her eyes widening in delight. "Books written by nature itself, not people. The language of wind, the language of fire. Wizards have tried to recreate these texts for centuries, but here are the originals." They walked past the shelves, trying not to touch anything. Harry noticed that some books here looked translucent, ghostly. "These are books that were never written," said Hermione quietly, checking the map. "Ideas that came to authors in dreams, but were forgotten by morning. Novels burned in fireplaces. Letters that were never sent." Ron stopped by a shelf where a thin notebook in a plain grey cover levitated. "Weird," he muttered. "I feel like I know this handwriting." He leaned closer, not touching the glass of the prism. Words surfaced on the cover, strategies of chess that would have made me a champion had I not been lazy. "That's my handwriting," Ron exclaimed, recoiling. "I thought about this in 5th year, but I never wrote it down." "The library remembers not just the text but the intent," Hermione explained, pulling him by the sleeve. "Come on, Ron, we can't linger near the unwritten. It draws you in. You'll start regretting lost opportunities and stay here forever, rereading a life you didn't have." They quickened their pace. The labyrinth became increasingly convoluted. Staircases here led not up or down, but sideways, defying gravity. Sometimes they had to walk along a wall, feeling the floor become the ceiling. Finally, Hermione's map led them to a high rotunda. In the center of the hall, on a raised dais of white marble, stood a solitary pedestal. It was empty, but hovering above it, in a beam of light falling from somewhere above, was a book. It didn't look like the others. It didn't glow, didn't change shape, and didn't try to bite anyone. It was a thick, massive tome, bound in dark burgundy leather, the corners of which were shod in dull silver. It looked weighty, real, but a sensation emanated from it. A pull. Harry felt it physically, like pressure in his chest. The book seemed to be calling them, not with a voice, but with a pure desire to be opened. "This is it," whispered Hermione. She stowed the map and drew her wand. "I can feel its magical signature. This is the chronicle of lost time." She slowly approached the pedestal. Harry and Ron took positions on either side of her, ready at any moment to repel an attack, whether from books or the Keeper. "Hermione, wait," Harry said suddenly as her hand reached for the tome. His anxiety, which had momentarily subsided, flared up again. The Keeper spoke of a price, of weight. "We can't just take it." "We aren't going to take it, Harry," she replied, not taking her eyes off the cover. Her voice sounded slightly detached, as if she was speaking in her sleep. "I only need to read one chapter. About the ritual of return. I'll memorize it and we'll leave. I'll just take a look." "Hermione, you sound like," began Ron, but fell silent. Hermione's fingertips touched the cool leather of the binding. In that instant, the library froze. The rustling of billions of pages around them ceased abruptly. The light of the orbs became brighter, focusing on the three of them like spotlights on a stage. Hermione opened the book. Harry expected to see dense text, diagrams, runes, but the pages were not made of paper. They resembled thin sheets of ivory or polished stone, perfectly smooth and milky white. And they were absolutely blank. "What?" Ron exhaled in disappointment, peering over her shoulder. "Empty?" "We trudged through a desert, talked to an ink monster, and nearly went mad from whispering books for a blank notebook?" "It's not empty," whispered Hermione. Her eyes darted across the clean page, as if she saw text there. "It waits." "Waits for what?" Harry tensed. "For a reader," Hermione answered. And then it happened. Symbols began to surface on the white surface of the page, but they were not written in ink. They appeared like burns on skin, as if someone invisible was searing them from within. The text was red and gold. It pulsed, running across the page, coiling like a living vine. Hermione gasped, but did not pull her hand away. Instead, she placed her palms flat on the pages. "The text, it moves," she whispered. Harry saw the gold letters fail to stop at the edge of the page. They began to crawl off the book. They flowed onto Hermione's fingers, climbing up her wrists, encircling her arms in an intricate glowing pattern like ancient tattoos. "Hermione!" Ron shouted, grabbing her shoulder, trying to pull her away. But Hermione stood rooted to the spot. She couldn't move. I see everything." Her voice changed, becoming deep and resonant, like the voice of the library. "The history of magic. Not as we thought. Merlin didn't die. The founders didn't quarrel. Time is not a line. It is a circle." "It's consuming her," Harry realized. He pointed his wand at the book. "Expelliarmus." The spell hit the book, but instead of knocking it away, the beam rebounded and scattered in a firework of sparks. The book seemed glued to Hermione's hands. The text was already rising past her elbows, crawling under the sleeves of her robes. Hermione threw her head back, and her eyes began to glow with the same golden light as the letters. "Knowledge has weight," the Keeper's voice thundered from everywhere. She wanted to know. Now she will become knowledge. The walls of the rotunda trembled. The shelves around them began to move, shifting closer, closing the circle, cutting off paths of escape. The library had no intention of letting its new readers go. It had found someone who could contain its stories, and now it intended to fill this vessel to the brim, even if it destroyed the vessel itself. The world around them did not merely tremble, it fractured. As the walls of the rotunda began to close in, sealing them in the trap, the space inside the Library of Alexandria lost its stability. The golden light of the magical orbs, which until now had been warm and soothing, suddenly turned blindingly white, cold and cutting. It flooded everything, erasing contours, dissolving the floor beneath their feet and the ceiling overhead. Harry tried to grab Ron's hand, tried to shout to Hermione, who stood frozen in the center of this chaos, shining like a supernova covered in living script. But sound vanished. Gravity vanished. He felt a sharp jerk, not physical but mental, as though someone had rudely yanked a bookmark from a tome, closing it mid-sentence. His body became light as a feather, then incredibly heavy, like lead. He was spun in a whirlwind of pages. Millions of sheets of paper flew past him, brushing his face with dry, cool touches. His name was written on every one of them, but in different handwritings, different inks, different languages. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Harry Potter, the boy who died. Harry Potter, who became minister. Harry Potter, who never received a letter. And then the light went out, and he fell. The landing was soft, but unpleasant. Harry didn't hit stone or wood. He fell into something fluffy, cold and damp. He lay there, breathing heavily, trying to calm a heart that was beating somewhere in his throat. His fingers convulsively clutched his wand. "Ron, Hermione?" he called out. His voice sounded muffled, as if he were speaking under a thick duvet. No answer, only silence. Harry slowly got to his feet. He wasn't in the rotunda. Nor was he in the labyrinth of shelves they had wandered earlier. He stood in the middle of a boundless field shrouded in thick, blue-gray fog. The mist swirled around his legs, rising to his waist, hiding the ground. But the strangest thing was that beneath his feet was neither grass nor earth. It was paper. This entire world consisted of shredded, crumpled, half-decayed paper. It was a graveyard of drafts. Mountains of crumpled sheets rose around him like hills. In the distance, the silhouettes of trees could be seen, but when Harry squinted, he realized they weren't trees, but giant quills stuck into the ground, from which black ink slowly trickled, forming dark rivers. The sky overhead was the color of old parchment, yellowish-gray, without sun or stars. The section of the unwritten, Harry guessed, recalling Hermione's words before everything went wrong. Ideas that never became reality. He took a step, and the paper beneath his feet rustled. This sound was the only one in this dead world. Lumos! The tip of his wand flared, but the light behaved strangely here. It didn't disperse the fog, but seemed to be absorbed by it, making the shadows even deeper. Harry moved forward, simply because standing still was unbearable. He had to find a way out. He had to find his friends. He walked for a long time. Time here seemed frozen. Perhaps minutes passed, perhaps hours. The landscape did not change. Paper hills, ink rivers, gray sky. But suddenly the fog began to lift. Outlines began to emerge from the haze. At first blurred, indistinct, like a watercolor painting splashed with water. Then they became firmer, gaining color and form. Harry stopped dead in his tracks. In front of him stood a fence. An ordinary wooden fence, painted white, the paint peeling in places. Behind the fence was a gate that creaked quietly in the wind, though Harry felt no wind. And behind the gate, stood a house. It was a small, two-story brick cottage covered in ivy. Cozy smoke drifted from the chimney. Lights burned in the windows on the ground floor, and Harry saw curtains swaying in the breeze. He knew this house. He had seen it only once in his life, in a photograph Hagrid had given him, and then its ruins in Godric's Hollow. But here, it was whole. The roof hadn't collapsed. The walls weren't scorched by an explosion. It was his parents' house. "No," Harry whispered, backing away. "It's not true. It's an illusion. The library is playing with me." He gripped his wand tighter, preparing to defend himself. He expected a Dementor to jump out the door, or the Keeper, or Voldemort. But the door simply opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. Tall, thin, bespectacled, with untidy black hair that stuck up at the back just like Harry's. He was dressed in a comfortable jumper and held a cup in his hands. James Potter stretched, inhaling the air, and looked straight at Harry. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "Lily," he called, turning back to the house. The voice was so alive, so warm, so real, that Harry's knees buckled. "Lily, come here. He's back." Harry wanted to shout, "It's a lie!" Wanted to turn and run into the paper fog, but his legs wouldn't obey. He stood transfixed, staring at the man who was his father, and yet could not be. A woman ran out of the house. Her dark red hair streamed like flames behind her shoulders. Green eyes, the very same eyes Harry saw in the mirror every morning, filled with tears. "Harry," she breathed. She didn't run. She flew to the gate. She yanked it open and rushed towards him. Harry instinctively raised his wand. "Stop!" he shouted hoarsely. "Don't come near. You're dead!" Lily stopped to step away from him. She wasn't afraid of the wand. She looked at him with such pain and such love that Harry's heart squeezed into a tiny aching knot. "Oh, Harry," she whispered. "My dear tortured boy, of course, we are dead there, in your world, but not here." "This is the section of the unwritten," said James, walking up to his wife and placing a hand on her shoulder. He looked at his son with pride and sadness. "Stories are kept here that could have happened if fate had taken a different turn. If I hadn't left my wand on the sofa that night, if Peter hadn't been the secret keeper, if it's an illusion," Harry repeated, but there was no longer certainty in his voice. He lowered his wand. "What is an illusion?" asked Lily. "Is what you feel right now not real? Is your pain not real? Is your love for us an illusion?" She held out a hand. "We waited for you, son. In this version of the story, we survived. We fled that night. We went to France, then to America. You grew up with us. You didn't know the cupboard under the stairs. You didn't know hunger. You were happy." The air around them changed. The smell of old paper and ink vanished. Now it smelled of freshly cut grass, treacle tart, and a specific scent Harry couldn't identify, but knew was the smell of home. The smell of his mother's perfume. "Come inside," said James, nodding at the open door of the house. Warm, golden light poured from within. "Sirius will be here soon. He promised to bring his new motorbike to show you. And Remus finally found a cure. Sirius. Remus. Alive. Happy." The temptation was so strong it made him dizzy. Harry took a step forward. His foot stepped onto the gravel path. The stones crunched under his sole. Such a real, earthly sound. He could just walk in, close the door behind him, and stay here. Forget about the library, the keeper, his duties, the scars. Just live the life that had been stolen from him. Lily took his hand. Her palm was warm, soft, living. "You are so tired, Harry," she whispered. "You don't need to fight anymore. The story can end here, with a happy ending. Don't you deserve that?" Harry looked into her green eyes. He wanted to say yes, so badly. He wanted to hug her and never let go. But something nagged at him, some small, persistent detail at the edge of his consciousness. He looked at his mother's hand, holding his palm. The skin was smooth, without a single wrinkle, without a single scar from kitchen burns or gardening. Perfect. He shifted his gaze to James. His glasses glinted, but Harry wasn't reflected in them. Only the perfect, painted facade of the house was reflected. And then he listened. Silence. There were no birds here. No sound of wind in the trees. No sound of distant cars or aeroplanes. This world was mute. It was a stage set. And one more thing. "Where is Ron?" asked Harry. His voice sounded harsh, shattering the cozy atmosphere. Lily's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. Something cold, like the glint of ink. "Ron?" she asked softly. "Oh, the red-haired Weasley boy. You don't know him in this story, darling. We left England, remember? You never went to Hogwarts. You had other friends. Better ones. Ones who didn't envy you. Ones who didn't drag you into danger." Harry yanked his hand from her grasp. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by the cold of paper. "Ron never really envied me," he said, stepping back. "And he didn't drag me into danger. We went into it together. And Hermione. Forget about them." James's voice grew harder, commanding. "They are part of that painful life. They aren't needed here. Here, there is us. Your family." Harry looked at the house. The light in the windows now seemed not warm, but sinister, like fire in a furnace ready to burn anything that entered. "You aren't my family," Harry said quietly. "My family died protecting me. They gave me life, not a sweet dream. And you are just ink. You are text that no one wrote because it would be a lie." The faces of Lily and Perrin James began to change. Their features ran like wax. Their eyes turned into black spots. Their mouths stretched into unnatural smiles. "You refuse a happy ending," hissed a voice that belonged not to his mother but to the library itself. "You choose pain?" "I choose the truth," said Harry, and raised his wand. He didn't attack the figures of his parents. That would have been too painful. Even knowing they weren't real. He pointed his wand at the sky, at that grey paper sky hanging over them. Reducto! A powerful blast of magic struck the sky, and it cracked, not like glass but like paper. A hole with charred edges appeared in it, through which the cold blue light of the library's reality shone. The world around them trembled. The house in Godric's Hollow began to fold like a house of cards. The figures of his parents crumbled into thousands of letters, carried away by the wind into the darkness. "I'm sorry," whispered Harry into the void. "But I can't stay." He pushed off the ground and jumped into the tear in the sky, leaving behind the perfect life that never was. Falling through the tear in the sky felt like plunging into a whirlpool. But instead of water, images and sounds swirled around Harry. He flew through a kaleidoscope of other people's lives, through fragments of phrases, through the sense of cities that never existed. He felt nauseous from the overload of information. His brain simply refused to process such an amount of data in a second. He landed painfully, his shoulder striking something hard and cold. When the dizziness passed, Harry got up and looked around. He was back in the library, but in a part of it that looked like an architect's nightmare. There was no up or down here. Gravity acted selectively. Staircases intertwined in impossible knots, leading nowhere. Shelves grew downwards from the ceiling, and books crawled along them like ants. Harry stood on a narrow stone ledge, suspended in the middle of a gigantic shaft, the walls of which were covered in mirrors. But the mirrors did not reflect him. They reflected what was happening in Hermione's mind. "Hermione!" he shouted. His voice echoed off the mirrors 1,000 times, transforming into the word knowledge. 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 He saw her. She wasn't on a ledge. She was suspended in the air, in the center of the shaft, surrounded by a sphere of golden letters and symbols, revolving around her like the rings of Saturn. Hermione had changed. She no longer looked like a frightened girl being consumed by a book. Now she looked like a goddess. Her hair floated in weightlessness, turning into streams of ink. Her skin glowed from within, with a soft, amber light, and her eyes. Her eyes were two bottomless wells of pure information. They had no pupils, only the endless scrolling of lines of text. The chronicle of lost time was no longer in her hands. It had dissolved, becoming part of her body. Runes and formulas covered her arms, neck, and face, pulsing to the rhythm of her heart. Harry took a step along the edge of the ledge, risking a fall into the abyss. "Hermione, you have to wake up. It's a trap." She slowly turned her head towards him. Her gaze was the focus of a telescope. Cold, analytical, devoid of emotion. "Harry," her voice sounded not like human speech, but like a choir of 1,000 scholars speaking in unison. "You interrupted my research. This is irrational." "Research?" Harry gasped in indignation. "Hermione, you are a prisoner. This book is devouring you." "It is not devouring," Hermione objected calmly, raising a hand. The symbols around her flared brighter. "It is integrating. I see everything, Harry. I see the structure of magic. I see Merlin's mistakes. I see the formula that could have cured Ariana Dumbledore. I see the spell that could have stopped Grindelwald without a single drop of blood." She made a gesture with her fingers, and the air before her thickened, turning into a screen. On it, Harry saw Hogwarts, but it wasn't the castle he knew. It was a perfect Hogwarts. Without the ruins from the battle. Without monuments to the fallen. There, Fred Weasley laughed alongside George. There, Lupin taught Teddy transfiguration. There, Snape, old and grumpy, brewed potions, unburdened by guilt. "I can fix it," said Hermione. A note of fanaticism appeared in her voice, which frightened Harry more than the coldness. "With this knowledge, I can rewrite history. I can cancel pain. I can make the world rational, logical, and safe." "At what cost?" Harry shouted. "At the cost of you ceasing to be yourself. At the cost of us all becoming just characters in your perfect story." "And are we not characters?" she asked, and there was such deep melancholy in the question that Harry shuddered. "Are we not puppets of fate? Of prophecies? Of accidents? The library offers me the chance to become the author, to take the quill in my own hands. Why should I refuse the power to do good?" Harry realized he couldn't defeat her with logic. Right now, she was the embodiment of logic. She was absolute reason, devoid of heart. The library had found her weakness, her desire to fix everything, her perfect student complex, believing that if you read enough books, you can solve any problem. He had to reach her, physically. Harry looked at the distance, separating the ledge from Hermione's sphere, 5 meters of emptiness. Magic works differently here, he recalled. Intent works here. He stowed his wand. It wouldn't help here. This wasn't a duel. Harry closed his eyes and imagined a bridge. Not a magical bridge of light, but an old, creaky wooden bridge that was near the burrow. A bridge he associated with home, with the Weasley family, with Hermione sitting on the railing reading a book, while he and Ron did gnomed the garden. He stepped into the void. His foot didn't fall. It found support. Something creaked under his sole. Harry opened his eyes. Stretching beneath his feet was a thin, barely visible path, made of old, tattered book pages. They were pages from her favorite books, Hogwarts, A History, The Tales of Beedle the Bard, first-year textbooks. He moved forward, step by step. Hermione, he spoke, not stopping, though the wind around the sphere tried to blow him away. Do you remember what you told me in first year? Before I went to Quirrell. Hermione frowned. The symbols on her face trembled. That is irrelevant information. That is a low-priority emotional memory. You said, books. And cleverness. There are more important things. Friendship and bravery. Hermione flinched. The sphere around her dimmed for a moment. You know it yourself? Harry continued, getting closer. You always knew. Knowledge without love is just data. It's a cold archive. If you rewrite history to make it perfect, it will cease to be ours. It will become a lab experiment. He was already close. He saw real wet tears flowing down her cheeks beneath the golden letters. She was crying, though her face remained impassive. Inside the goddess of knowledge, a little girl who was afraid of making a mistake still lived. But it's so clear here, Harry, she whispered, and the chorus of voices vanished, leaving only her own, brittle and familiar. There are no doubts here. I know the answers to all questions. If I leave, I will become ordinary again. I will not know what to do again. We never know what to do. Harry reached out through the whirlwind of golden symbols. They burned his skin like electric shocks, but he didn't pull back. That's the point. We choose blindly. We take risks. We live. He grabbed her hand. The contact was like an electric shock. Harry would have been thrown back if he hadn't held on so tight. A stream of her thoughts rushed into his head. He saw the world through her eyes, billions of connections, causes and effects. It was beautiful and terrible. It was too much for a human. Let's go home, Hermione, he shouted, drowning out the hum of magic. Ron is there. He's waiting. He's not perfect. He doesn't know the answers. But he's real. At the mention of Ron, the golden glow in Hermione's eyes faded. The pupils returned. She inhaled deeply, as if surfacing from water. Harry, she asked, and there was horror in her voice. What have I done? I almost erased us. You just got too absorbed in reading. He smiled forcefully, feeling the reality around them beginning to crack at the seams. The illusion of absolute power was crumbling. The sphere disintegrated into thousands of golden sparks. Gravity returned with a jerk. They fell onto the ledge, barely holding onto the edge. The chronicle of lost time fell out of Hermione, literally separated from her body, and crashed onto the stone with a thud. It was smoking. Its pages turned frantically, as if in pain. Hermione was trembling. The text on her skin faded, turning into ordinary ink stains that quickly dried and disappeared. I saw the keeper, she whispered, clinging to Harry's robes. He isn't just a guard. He is a prisoner. He is the first one who read this book, and he wanted me to replace him." "We won't let that happen," Harry said firmly. He got up and helped her rise. "We need to find Ron. Where is he?" Hermione closed her eyes, focusing for a moment. Remnants of absolute knowledge still smoldered within her. "He isn't in an illusion," she said, snapping her eyes open. "He is in the reality of the library. And he is in trouble. The keeper went to him." "Why him?" "Because Ron is the heart," Hermione explained, picking up the book from the floor, which now looked simply like an old, charred tome. She did so carefully, wrapping her hand in her robe sleeve. "The keeper couldn't break you through the past. Couldn't keep me through knowledge. Now he will try to destroy us through emotions. He wants to use Ron as a hostage." The walls of the mirrored shaft began to crack. The illusion was falling apart, exposing the true bones of the library, dark, dusty shelves. "Where do we go?" asked Harry. "Down," said Hermione, pointing to the abyss beneath their feet. "Into the very heart of the labyrinth, to where the ending is written." She looked at Harry, and in her gaze he saw a new strength. She had refused omniscience, but she had kept wisdom. "Hold on, Harry. We'll have to jump." "Again," he groaned. "I'm starting to hate heights." They held hands and stepped into the darkness, leaving behind the debris of tempting illusions to face the most terrible enemy, the truth they had to write themselves. Plunging into the darkness was unlike any ordinary physical fall. The wind did not whistle in their ears, nor did their stomachs leap to their throats from the G-force. It was more akin to a slow descent into thick, cold honey. The surrounding darkness was not empty. It was saturated with fragments of phrases, the whispers of forgotten prayers, and the cries of battles fought thousands of years ago. Harry felt other people's memories passing through him, someone's last breath, someone's first love, someone's betrayal. Here in its depths, the library did not merely store stories, it was woven from them. Hermione held his hand tightly. Her palm still trembled after contact with the chronicle, but her grip was strong. Harry felt warmth returning to her, felt her becoming the Hermione he knew once more, vulnerable yet unbreakable. They landed softly, as if upon a mountain of feathers. When Harry opened his eyes, he realized they had ended up at the very bottom of the world. The place resembled the roots of a gigantic tree, but instead of wooden roots there were intertwined scrolls, massive tomes, chains and pipes through which ink pulsed. All of this wove together into enormous columns, supporting a ceiling that was lost somewhere in infinite height. It was dark here, but the darkness was alive. It breathed. "Lumos," whispered Hermione. The light of her wand was dim, as if the very air here absorbed photons. But it was enough to see what was happening ahead. In the center of a cavern made of interwoven folios stood a semblance of a stage, a dais constructed from stacks of books. And on this stage was Ron. He wasn't bound by ropes or chains. He was kneeling, head bowed, and around him, like snakes, ribbons of text writhed. They crawled out of the floor, entangled his legs, and rose to his chest. Looming over him was the keeper. The shadow figure here, in the heart of the library, looked even more majestic and terrible. In its hand, or what served as a hand, it held a long, sharp quill, from the tip of which red ink dripped. The keeper was writing, but not on paper. It was writing directly in the air, and the words that appeared hardened, becoming part of the reality that constricted Ron. And then the loyal friend, the one who was always in the shadow, realized that his sacrifice was necessary. The keeper's voice thundered, resonating in every book around. He looked into the face of eternity and accepted his fate. His heart stopped for the sake of the grand finale. "Shut up!" Ron shouted. His voice was hoarse, strained, but there was so much fury in it that the ribbons of text around him trembled. "I'm not planning to die for your stupid plot. I am not a supporting character. I am Ron Weasley, and I am going to get up and kick your inky sides. You do not understand the beauty of tragedy," the keeper continued, ignoring his shouts. It waved the quill, and a new ribbon of text coiled around Ron's throat, stifling his voice. "Tragedy is eternal. Happiness is fleeting. Your death will be the culmination of a great epic. It will give meaning to everything." "Expelliarmus!" Harry roared, leaping out from behind a column. A red beam slammed into the keeper, splashing the ink of which it was composed. The creature hissed, stepping back. The quill fell from its hand and dissolved into the air. Hermione instantly pointed her wand at Ron. "Diffindo!" The ribbons of text strangling him were sliced apart like ordinary ribbons. Ron inhaled with a loud wheeze, coughed, and fell onto his hands, trying to catch his breath. "Harry! Hermione!" he croaked, lifting his head. His face was pale, but relief shone in his eyes. Just in time. This scribbler was already getting to the epilogue. Harry and Hermione ran to him, helping him up. "How are you?" Harry asked quickly, checking his friend. Red marks from the words remained on Ron's neck. "Been better." Ron waved it off. "He tried to rewrite me, Harry. He tried to put thoughts in my head that I'm unnecessary, that you'd be better off without me, that my death would make your story deeper." "That's a lie," Hermione said firmly, squeezing his hand. "That is the worst lie in the world. Without you there is no our story. You are its heart." The keeper, who had momentarily lost form, gathered itself again into a giant shadow figure. Now it lacked that cold majesty. Now it looked enraged. Its eyes burned with fierce white fire. "You are violating the canon," it roared, and at the sound, books tumbled from the shelves. "You are interfering with the narrative. Stories must have an ending. Heroes must suffer. It is the law of the genre. It is the law of the library." The walls of the cavern began to move. Columns of books disintegrated, turning into an avalanche of tomes rushing at them from all sides. The floor beneath their feet trembled, cracking and releasing fountains of black ink. "He wants to bury us under the weight of knowledge," screamed Hermione, over the roar. "Literally. Protego totalum," Harry shouted, creating a shield dome over them. Books slammed into the shield, bounced off, exploded in clouds of dust. Some of them opened in flight, and ghostly figures of knights, dragons, monsters flew from their pages. Illustrations come to life and eager to join the battle. "We can't stay here," shouted Ron, fighting off a paper griffin, trying to peck him in the head. "We need to run." "Where?" asked Hermione. She looked around, her brain working feverishly to analyze the situation. "We are at the bottom. There is no exit. The doors to the desert are closed." The keeper bore down on them, growing in size. Now it resembled a black tsunami. "You will become part of the collection," its voice thundered. "I will write for you the ending you deserve. An ending of oblivion." Hermione suddenly froze. She looked at the keeper, then at the pile of books, then at her hands, on which faint traces of the magical text were still visible. "No. she whispered. And then louder. No! He's right. What? Harry was barely holding the shield against the onslaught of the avalanche of encyclopedias. Hermione, if you're going on about rationality again, now is not the time. No, Harry, listen. He says stories must have an ending. He wants to write us an ending. He perceives us as characters. So what? Ron didn't understand. So characters cannot walk out of a book? Hermione's eyes lit up. As long as we play by his rules, running, hiding, looking for an exit, we are just heroes of an adventure novel. And heroes don't decide when the book ends. The author decides that. So, what do you propose? Harry felt the shield beginning to crack. Surrender? No. Hermione grabbed both of them by their robes and pulled them close. We must stop being characters. We must become authors. She pointed her wand, not at the keeper and not at the books. She pointed it at the empty space in front of her. The keeper said, "Knowledge has weight." But he forgot another rule of magic, the rule of creation. The strongest magic isn't what you learn from books. It's what you create yourself. Hermione, get to the point, yelled Ron as a giant tome of A History of Goblin Rebellions smashed into the shield right above his head. We won't look for an exit, she shouted. We will write it. She looked at Harry. Harry, you defeated Voldemort, not because you knew more spells, but because you chose your path. You rewrote the prophecy. Do it now. Imagine the exit. Don't look for it with your eyes. Create it with your intent. Harry understood. This whole place, this library, this keeper, it was a reality woven of words and imagination. It responded to thought. The keeper controlled it because he was confident in his right as author. But they were living people. They had will. Harry lowered his wand. The shield vanished. Harry! Screamed Ron, but the books didn't fall on them. They hung in the air an inch from their heads. Because Harry wasn't afraid of them. He refused to be a victim of the plot. He closed his eyes and focused. He didn't think about the door to the desert. He didn't think about a portal. He thought about the end, not death, but the word "the end" at the bottom of a page. About the moment you close a book and return to the real world. About the feeling of solid ground underfoot, the smell of morning coffee, the silence that doesn't whisper in other people's voices. He imagined a quill in his hand. We are leaving, he said loudly and clearly. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. A declaration. The air around them vibrated. The keeper's ink began to boil. You cannot. The creature's voice became uncertain. It began to disintegrate into separate letters. The plot is not finished. Cliffhanger. Denouement. The plot is finished, said Ron firmly, standing next to Harry. He understood too. We're tired. We want to go home. Full stop. Full stop, repeated Hermione. She raised her hand and made a movement in the air, as if placing a full stop at the end of a sentence. And the reality of the library cracked. Not the ceiling, not the walls. Space itself tore open before them like a sheet of paper cut by a knife. Behind the cut, there was no darkness. There was light, blinding, white, morning light, and wind. Real hot desert wind, carrying the scent of sand, not dust. No, screamed the keeper. He lunged at them, trying to grab them with his inky tentacles to drag them back into the text. You cannot leave the page blank. But he couldn't touch them. They were no longer part of his story. They had become readers closing a boring book. Run! Shouted Harry. They rushed towards the tear in space. The keeper's ink splashed at their heels. Books tried to build a wall in their path but flew apart at their mere desire to pass. Harry jumped first. pulling his friends with him. He felt the library's magic clinging to his clothes like sticky cobwebs, trying to hold him, to whisper one more riddle, one more temptation. But he cast it aside. He chose reality. Imperfect, painful, unpredictable, but his own. They flew through the white light, and the last thing Harry heard before the noise of the library vanished forever was the disappointed groan of the keeper, left alone once more, with his billions of words, and not a single listener. The white light into which they had leapt was not an exit in the conventional sense. It was not the instantaneous transition from point A to point B characteristic of apparition. It was akin to existing inside a cloud, a thick milky white substance that possessed neither temperature, nor scent, nor sound. Harry felt only one thing: the hands of his friends. On his right, he gripped Ron's hand, broad, calloused, reliable. On his left, his fingers were interlaced with Hermione's thin, still trembling digits. This was the only anchor keeping his mind intact amidst this absolute nothingness. "Are we dead?" Ron's voice rang out. It sounded strange, devoid of echo, as if Ron were speaking from inside a cotton duvet. "No," Hermione replied. Her voice was weak, but in it, Harry could hear the return of that analytical intellect he so cherished. "We are in the margins." "The what?" asked Harry, straining to see anything at all in the white haze. But there was no horizon here, nor floor beneath their feet. They were simply suspended in space. "The margins of the page," Hermione explained. "You know, that white space around the text where nothing is written. We have exited the plot, but we haven't exited the book. We are, in the interim." Harry tried to take a step. His foot met a springy resistance, like a taut canvas. "We need to move," he said. "If these are margins, there must be an edge to the sheet somewhere." They moved forward, though the concept of "body more forward" was purely conditional here. Walking was difficult, like wading through deep water. The white mist clung to their faces, trying to lull them, to force them to stop. It was peaceful here. Too peaceful. After the horror of the section of the unwritten, and the chaos of the library's destruction, this silence felt like a blessing. One wanted simply to lie down on this white, resilient surface and sleep. "Don't stop," Hermione said sharply, squeezing Harry's hand tighter. This is white sickness. The temptation of the blank page. The desire to do nothing, to decide nothing. It is also the keeper's trap, only softer. "The keeper," Ron recalled, and his voice grew tense. "We escaped him, didn't we? You put a full stop." "A full stop is just a punctuation mark, Ron. It isn't a lock." Suddenly the white mist ahead began to darken. At first, it looked like a drop of ink falling into a glass of milk. Thin black tendrils began to spread through space, forming a pattern. The pattern grew thicker, denser. It transformed into words, sentences, paragraphs hanging in the air, barring their way. And the heroes realized that their escape was merely an illusion, part of an even greater design. They wandered in the fog until they forgot their names, becoming nameless shadows on the shores of eternity. "He is writing us," Harry whispered, feeling the cold grip of fear squeezing his heart again. "He is trying to finish writing us right now." The text became denser, turning into bars. The letters were sharp as razor blades. "Did you think you could simply close the book?" The keeper's voice resonated. This time it sounded not from the outside, but from within their heads. But now it wasn't loud and thunderous. It was insinuating, like the rustle of a snake in dry grass. From the white fog, a figure began to form, but it was not the gigantic ink monster they had seen in the cavern. Before them stood an ordinary man. He was dressed in an old-fashioned robe resembling a tunic woven of grey linen. His face was weary, with deep wrinkles around the eyes, and his hair was dusted with the ash of centuries. In his hands was a simple goose quill. Only his eyes betrayed his nature. They were absolutely black, without whites, like 2 drops of that same Negredo. "I am not a monster," said the keeper in a human voice, looking at them with sadness. "I am memory. You are trying to run from memory. That is impossible." "We aren't running from memory," Harry objected, taking a step forward and shielding his friends. "We are returning to life." "Life is chaos," the keeper gently countered. He made a movement with the quill, and a scene materialized in the air before Harry, the Battle of Hogwarts. It was so real that Harry recoiled. He saw the fire, heard the screams, smelled the burning. He saw the bodies of the fallen. "Life is pain, loss, aging, and oblivion," continued the keeper. "Up there, your memories will fade. You will forget the faces of those you loved. You will become old and infirm. Your stories will turn into confused fables for grandchildren." He waved the quill again, and the scene changed. Now it was the Hall of Alexandria, quiet, majestic, eternal. "Here, you will be preserved forever, perfect. Young heroes, your friendship will never wither, for it will be recorded on pages that do not burn. I offer you immortality. Not physical, no. Narrative." Hermione released Harry's hand and took a step towards the keeper. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You have guarded books for so long that you've forgotten what they are written for." The keeper tilted his head to the side, looking at her with curiosity. "And what is that?" "To be read and closed," Hermione answered. "The point of a story isn't for it to last forever. The point is that it ends. It is the ending that gives it weight." She raised her hands. There were no longer magical tattoos on them, but the skin still remembered the touch of absolute magic. "I held the chronicle. I saw perfection. And you know what? It is dead. It is cold. Life has value precisely because it is fragile. We forget, yes, but that is what allows us to forgive. We age, yes, but that means we grow." "Beautiful words," sighed the keeper. "But they are only words. You shall not pass. I am the architect of this text. I will not release you." He raised the quill high above his head. Ink spurted from its tip, shooting upwards and turning into a black cloud that began to engulf the white space. It was a storm, but not of wind and rain, but of letters. Sharp, black symbols rained down upon them like hail. They cut skin, tore robes. Every blow of such a letter brought not physical pain, but a fit of despair, fear, hopelessness. "Protego!" shouted Ron, but his shield shattered under the onslaught of words like glass. "Wand magic doesn't work here," shouted Hermione, covering her head with her arms. "It's a mental attack. He's trying to break our will. What do we do?" Harry felt the hail words battering him. Weakness, failure, orphan, guilty. They hit the most painful spots. "We must rewrite the rules," cried Hermione. "We are the authors. Remember." "But we don't have a quill," Ron yelled back. "We don't need a quill." Hermione straightened to her full height, ignoring the black whirlwind. "We have something stronger. We have reality." She looked at Harry and Ron. "The keeper fears reality. He fears change. We must show him something that isn't in books." "Like what?" Harry didn't understand. "Chaos. Ron suddenly laughed. Real, living, unpredictable chaos. That which cannot be written down. Ron whipped out his wand. But instead of casting a protective charm, he pointed it at himself. "Remember Fred and George's fireworks," he shouted. "The ones that multiplied when you tried to extinguish them." Harry understood. Ron wasn't going to attack the Keeper. He was going to create something so senseless and bright that the library simply wouldn't be able to digest it. "Ron, you're a genius," exclaimed Harry. "I know," Ron grinned. "Wadiwasi Maxima." But he didn't just pronounce the spell. He poured a memory into it. A memory of Weasleys, wizard wheezes. Of laughter, of colors, of the smell of gunpowder and caramel. Of absolute, unbridled joy that couldn't care less about rules and plots. From the tip of his wand burst not a beam, but a stream of multicolored sparks that instantly transformed into small glowing dragons. They didn't attack. They began to dance. They flew around the Keeper, bursting with loud cracks, scattering confetti, whistling, singing silly songs. The Keeper recoiled. He tried to brush the dragons away with his quill, but it passed through them. "What is this?" he asked, bewildered. "This is illogical. This does not fit the genre." "This is life," shouted Hermione. She raised her wand too. "Orchideus." She put a memory of her parents' garden into the spell. Of the smell of roses after rain, of the imperfection of nature, where every petal is unique. Flowers began to sprout from the white floor. Real, living flowers. They pierced the paper of reality, their roots destroying the structure of the text. Vines wrapped around the Keeper's legs, but they didn't strangle him, they tickled. The Keeper looked stunned. His black world of strict logic and eternal dramas was crumbling under the onslaught of absurdity and beauty. "My turn," said Harry. He remembered flying on a broomstick, the feeling of wind in his face, the whistle in his ears, risk, speed, the feeling when you dive for the snitch not knowing if you'll manage to pull out of the dive. He pointed his wand upwards into the black cloud of letters. Expecto Patronum, the silver stag burst free. But this time, it wasn't just silver. It shone with all the colors of the rainbow. It was the embodiment of pure, unbridled energy. The stag galloped across the field, shattering obstacle words with its hooves, turning them into fireflies. It slammed into the Keeper's black cloud and scattered it. The Keeper dropped the quill. He fell to his knees amidst flowers, confetti, and radiance. His face was no longer formidable. It was confused, like a child seeing fireworks for the first time. "It is beautiful," he whispered. I forgot what it looks like." The white space around them began to crack, but these were not cracks of destruction. These were cracks through which real sunlight was breaking. "The way is open," shouted Hermione. "Up! Look up!" Above them, in the rupture of the black cloud, a point of blinding blue color appeared. The color of the Egyptian sky. "Goodbye!" Ron shouted to the Keeper, who was sitting among the flowers examining a petal. "Read more comedies. It's good for your health." They pushed off from the paper ground. This time gravity worked for them. It pulled them upwards, towards the light, towards the exit. They flew through layers of reality, leaving behind the world of words, the world of eternity, the world that wanted to preserve them but nearly destroyed them. The last thing Harry saw, glancing down, was the lonely figure of the Keeper slowly lifting a flower to his nose, trying to remember its scent. The flight through the layers of reality ended as abruptly as it had begun. The sensation of weightlessness vanished, and gravity struck them with all the force of an enraged giant. They crashed onto a hard, cold surface. Harry banged his knee painfully against stone. His wand slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor with a characteristic clatter. He scrambled up quickly, ignoring the pain, and snatched up his weapon. They were back. It was the Library of Alexandria again. But it had changed. The majestic silence and golden light were gone. The hall, which had previously resembled a temple of wisdom, now looked like the deck of a ship in a storm. Enormous shelves, towering hundreds of feet high, were shaking. Books flew from the shelves, not singly, but in whole avalanches, tumbling down like multicolored stones. A hum hung in the air, a low, vibrating sound that made teeth ache. It was the sound of a magical structure collapsing. "Look!" shouted Ron, pointing upwards. The ceiling, which had previously been lost in a golden haze, was now descending. And it wasn't a stone ceiling. It was sand. Millions of tons of sand, which the library's magic had held outside, were now seeping through invisible cracks in the dome. Streams of sand poured down, forming golden waterfalls that buried passages and bridges. "The Eye of Horus is closing," Hermione realized, shouting over the roar. She ran to the edge of the platform on which they had landed. "The planetary alignment is ending. The time pocket is collapsing. If we don't get out now, we'll simply be crushed by history." "Where's the exit?" Harry looked around frantically. The labyrinth had changed beyond recognition. Staircases had moved. Landmarks had disappeared under piles of books and sand. "There," pointed Ron. Far ahead, through the chaos of falling folios and curtains of sand, a thin strip of blue light was visible. It wasn't magical fire. It was real, living light from the night sky of Egypt, shining through an entrance that was rapidly narrowing, but the path to it was cut off. The bridge by which they had come was destroyed. Between them and the exit yawned an abyss, at the bottom of which a black sea of primal ink churned, and the level of this ink was rising rapidly. "Negredo is overflowing its banks," whispered Hermione. "Chaos is consuming order." "Run!" commanded Harry. They rushed forward, leaping over piles of books that stirred under their feet, like wounded animals. Running was difficult. The air had become thick and viscous. Every breath came with pain, as if their lungs were filling with dust. Suddenly, their path was blocked by a wall of encyclopedias that had fallen from the ceiling. "Bombarda!" shouted Harry. The explosion scattered the books, but new obstacles instantly began to grow in their place. The daylight breaking through the exit began to dim. The aperture was closing. "We won't make it," Ron yelled, gasping for breath. He tripped over a scroll that tried to coil around his leg, and barely stayed on his feet. "This place, it doesn't want to let us go." Harry felt the same. It wasn't just physical resistance. It was a resistance of will. The library, wounded by their refusal to become part of it, was now trying to kill them with its love, to bury them under the weight of knowledge, to keep them here as eternal exhibits. They ran out onto the last surviving balcony. 50 meters remained to the exit, but there was no bridge. Only emptiness, over which pages swirled, and the black sea below, from which tentacles were already rising. "Brooms!" exclaimed Harry, slapping his pockets, and immediately cursed. His firebolt had stayed at home. "Accio!" Hermione tried, attempting to pull debris from the bridge to create a crossing, but magic worked selectively here. The debris merely trembled and fell downwards. And then, a figure rose from the black abyss. It wasn't the human-like keeper they had seen in the white haze, nor was it the monster they had defeated in the cavern. It was something else. It was the very essence of the library. A gigantic wave of ink froze before them, taking the form of an enormous hand blocking the path to the light. Runes blazed on the surface of this hand. Payment, payment, payment. Knowledge has weight. Harry recalled the keeper's words from the very beginning. We can't just leave. We took something from here. We didn't take anything, shouted Ron. Not even that stupid poem that sat on my shoulder. We took something bigger, said Hermione quietly. She stood at the edge of the precipice, looking at the giant black hand. Her face was pale, but calm. We took the truth. She turned to the boys. I read the Chronicle, Harry. Even though I refused it, even though the text vanished from my skin, the memory remains. I know the formulas. I know Merlin's secrets. I know alternative histories. It is a burden, and the library will not let this burden out. It violates the balance. The hum around them intensified. The black hand began to clench into a fist, preparing to crush the balcony along with them. So what do you propose? Asked Harry, feeling his heart skip a beat. He knew that look on Hermione's face. It was the look with which she had cast the memory charm on her parents. Just don't say you're going to stay. No? She shook her head. I won't stay, but I won't take the knowledge out either. Hermione raised her wand and pressed its tip to her temple. Hermione, no! Screamed Ron, rushing towards her. Stop, Ron! Her voice was so commanding that Ron froze. It's the only way. I must give it back. I must pay for the exit. She closed her eyes. A thin, silvery thread began to stretch from her temple. It was much brighter than an ordinary memory. It shone like molten gold intertwined with diamond dust. It was the knowledge of the Chronicle. The absolute truth she had held in her head for only a few minutes, but which could change the world. Harry watched with horror and admiration. She was voluntarily giving up what the greatest wizards of the ages had striven for. The power of a god. Obliviate absolute, she whispered. The silvery thread snapped. Hermione swayed, but remained standing. She held a glowing sphere on the tip of her wand, the concentrated wisdom of centuries. She looked at the sphere with a slight sadness, but without regret. Knowledge without a soul is just ink, she said, and hurled the sphere into the abyss, straight into the advancing black hand. The sphere struck the surface of the ink and exploded. The flash of light was blinding. The inky hand shattered into billions of droplets. The abyss shone as if a star had fallen into it. The hum ceased, replaced by a pure high sound, like the ringing of a crystal goblet. From the bottom of the abyss, where the sphere had exploded, a bridge began to rise. It was made not of stone and not of books. It was made of light and letters, the very ones Hermione had returned to the library. Run! Shouted Hermione, who looked exhausted, as if she had just run a marathon. Harry caught her under one arm, Ron under the other. They stepped onto the bridge of light. It was solid underfoot, but warm. They ran. Behind their backs, the Library of Alexandria was finally collapsing. Shelves fell into the abyss, columns broke, sand buried the majestic halls. The story was ending. This world was folding up, returning to a state of non-existence until the next opening. Ahead, the blue slit of the exit had already turned into a narrow strip. "Faster!" shouted Harry. "Jump!" They reached the end of the light bridge. Beyond lay only the threshold, behind which the sandstorm of the real world raged. They pushed off and jumped into the blue light. At the very moment their bodies crossed the boundary, Harry heard a sound behind him, like the slamming of a gigantic book, closed with force. The darkness, the smell of dust, and the whispering vanished. They were met by heat, wind, and solid hot ground. They rolled down the slope of the dune, tangling in their robes, coughing, and spitting out sand. Harry stopped only at the bottom, at the foot of the parchment. He lay on his back, looking at the sky. It was no longer night. Dawn was breaking over the desert. The sky was pale pink, transitioning into turquoise. The stars had disappeared. The planetary alignment was over. Harry turned his head. Ron lay nearby, face buried in the sand, and his shoulders were shaking. He was laughing. Hysterically, relievedly laughing. Hermione sat a little further away, shaking sand from her hair. She looked pale. Deep shadows lay under her eyes, but her gaze was clear. She was here, completely. Harry stood up and looked at the top of the dune from which they had rolled. Where the silver funnel and majestic gates had been at night, there was now only ordinary sand. The wind had already managed to smooth the traces of their fall. The dune of time looked the same as thousands of other dunes in this boundless sea. The Library of Alexandria was gone. We're alive, Ron stated, rolling onto his back. I've never been so happy to have sand in my pants, honestly. Harry walked over to Hermione and offered her his hand. She took it, and Harry felt her palm was warm again. An ordinary human hand. How are you? He asked. Do you remember anything? Hermione looked at the sunrise. I remember we were there, she said slowly. I remember the fear. I remember the choice. But the knowledge. She knitted her brows, trying to recall something, and then smiled, lightly and freely. No, it's gone. I don't remember the formula for eternal life. I don't remember Merlin's true name. My head is empty. And it's wonderful. You sacrificed the greatest treasure in the world for us, said Ron, walking up to them. He looked more serious than ever. You know that? I sacrificed a reference book for a life. Hermione corrected him. She hugged them both. And that was the most profitable exchange in my history. Harry hugged his friends back. They stood in the middle of the desert, dirty, tired, empty-handed, but he felt richer than ever. He looked at his hand. There was nothing where the Harry from the illusion had touched him. But in his pocket he felt something hard. He pulled it out. It was a small, tattered scrap of paper. The corner of a page. Written on it was only one sentence, in a familiar, sharp handwriting, but the ink was already fading under the rays of the real sun. A story only matters when it is true. Harry smiled and opened his fingers. The wind caught the scrap of paper, carried it over the sands and dissolved it in the morning haze. Let's go home, he said. I desperately want tea, and perhaps to reread something simple, like the rules of Quidditch. Oh, I'm in. Ron perked up. By the way, I saw a book in the library there, 1,000 Ways to Outplay Harry Potter at Catching the Snitch. Shame I didn't manage to grab it. Ron, Hermione exclaimed reproachfully, but with a smile. What? I didn't say I read it. They slowly trudged up the slope of the dune to where they had left their skimmers. The sun rose above the horizon, flooding the desert with gold, erasing the shadows of the night and the shadows of the past. They were the authors of their own story, and the next page was blank.